I'm not even gonna bother telling you how I got here. You wouldn't believe me if I did. Let's just say it's dark times out there, but the castaway option isn't much better. I'm just glad I'm stuck here with my favorite book, I Heart Whales, who has so graciously helped fund today's video.
I Heart Whales is a kid's adventure book published by Harry Greenhill. This thrilling graphic novel combines action with comedy in a well-executed story that's fun for all ages. I read it every night before bed, and you can too by going to the Amazon.com link in the description. Use code Jargon to get a 50% discount on all physical or ebook purchases. Stay tuned to the end of the video to find out more about the world's greatest children's novel. And YouTube sponsor. And by sponsor, I mean the author paid me $20 to review it over 2 years ago on my Patreon. For those of you that don't know, about a year ago I created a Just Jargon Patreon page and tucked it at the bottom of my channel's About tab and didn't mention it to anyone since I didn't need the money. But I figured that if anyone was dedicated enough to be combing through the links on the back end of my channel, they probably might like some of the reward tiers. Specifically one where for $20 I would make a video reviewing a topic of their choice. However, someone found it quicker than I expected and bought the tier, then I raised it to $100 since videos began to take longer and longer to make, and then someone bought it for that price as well. So I just took the reward tier off entirely so the videos wouldn't build up. But now I'm finally going to get around to doing the 2 requests I already have. Welcome to Just Patreon.
I have to say, I quite like the personal approach this guy took in sponsoring me.
Not having to sell my soul through a contract that gives me a word-by-word script of what to say is certainly a plus.
Thanks for watching this episode of Angry Video Game Nerd on Dennis the Menace. But the real menace is having your unencrypted data being harvested by hackers, governments, and corporations. Thanks for watching this episode of Angry Video Game Nerd on Mortal Kombat games, which is about fighters from different realms performing gory fatalities. But the real fatality is your unencrypted data being harvested by hackers, governments, and corporations. Thanks for watching this episode of Angry Video Game Nerd on Spawn games, which is about stopping crimes in the future. But the real crime is having your unencrypted data being harvested by hackers, governments, and corporations.
Sorry, James, but I know the truth. The real you died years ago, and Screenwave Media has just been puppeting your lifeless husk around Weekend at Bernie's style. Poor guys need to move on. I know losing your friend is rough, but you need to reach the final stage of grief someday and just accept that James drank one too many Rolling Rocks, and his time ran out, like he was saying for years.
Tony, Kieran, Justin, and everybody at Screenwave will still be helping me with nerd episodes and reviews next year. I want to make it clear, without their help, I wouldn't have time to do any of this anymore.
I think you guys should just seek therapy to cope with the loss of your friend who clearly meant a lot to you. Wait, what was I talking about again? Oh right, the book.
When this came in the mail, I'll admit I was a bit skeptical. I mean, does this look like the typical review material you'd see me talk about on this channel? I know, don't judge a book by its cover and all that, but most books don't have their cover held together by 2 fucking staples.
The way this is put together, it looks like a school assignment rather than an official novel that's for sale somewhere. But no, this is actually a legit book that even has an ISBN number. I Heart Whales is a book.
Well, glad we got that cleared up.
It was created by my dude Henry Greenhill. Buying this keeps him from rummaging through the dumpster behind Burger King after it closes.
Well, if that isn't a vote of confidence, I don't know what is.
But trust me, when you read even the first sentence, no, the first word within its pages, you'll be a true believer like I am. And notice how it refers to the author in third person. This is the first hint that pushed me towards the revelation that would eventually come. But I'll get to that later.
Hello, kids! Today, I have a very special treat for you all!
Now, I know what you're all thinking, but I'm not gonna say it. We have to wait until the trial results come in before judging him too harshly. There also might be a few interesting artistic choices here, but believe you me, there's more to this than meets the eye. An amateur connoisseur of the arts may look at this and say it's a simplistic pencil sketch that's been scanned in, but a seasoned art critic can spot the truth. Much like how hieroglyphics can be nonsense to the uncultured. The line formation others mistake to be an art style is actually a metaphysical language that carries a message of its own. But in order to unwrap the deeper meaning, we must first deconstruct the literal. So the story begins with the narrator describing 2 men brought together by fate. The first was a nice guy who apparently spends his time giving gifts to children for whatever reason. And the second, named George, is one of the biggest assholes I've ever seen depicted in media. I'm not even kidding when I tell you that this man is one of the most irredeemable characters you can imagine. He's lazy, rude, angry, sexist, and apparently guilty of more crimes than can fit on his wanted poster. Also, he stabs a kid through the hand in the first few panels for no reason. Afterwards, he fights the people in the bar before getting the police called and fleeing in a chase that consumes the first 4 pages. This book is only 28 pages long, by the way. He runs from the bar, goes into a brothel, and steals one of the prostitutes' clothes. because why not?
Say S for cosplay!
Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, there's a running joke where this guy will say each letter of the alphabet and what it's for.
A is for escape. B is for brothel.
Now, some scholars have formed theories as to why this is, but I have my own. The introduction of such simple language may lead one to believe that this book was meant for kids.
After all, being the length that it is, and with a title called I Heart Whales, it may not be too far-fetched to say it has a child audience. Even the narrator calls the readers kids, but as you've seen already, that just isn't the case. Some might say that in taking these approaches, this story has alienated any potential audience it may have, but I say the opposite. By taking such odd choices, the book itself becomes an oddity. The book then becomes a talking point, spreading knowledge of it throughout the internet.
The author is clearly using this as a well-calculated strategy to see his message spread, as you'll soon realize.
So back in the story, George runs along and inadvertently becomes a prostitute himself for a bit, but then is nearly caught by police who apparently don't recognize him. Obviously, the dress is a pretty convincing disguise.
I mean, I can attest to that. Works for me every time.
The cop asks if George has seen the person they're on the hunt for. By sheer coincidence, the other man mentioned by the narrator is nearby, and George points at him saying,
D is for that guy.
leading them to arrest him instantly. My god, I wish it were as easy as that. Oh, well apparently it wasn't that easy because they let him off for only $30,000 worth of lawyer fees. I wonder where this is going. Also, he screams about justice all the time. George eventually gets to his ship since, as you may have guessed, he's a pirate. And his first, or rather only surviving mate named Roger Clay greets him. But George has a much more intimate greeting with Wooden Jen, who I'm pretty sure is just gender-bent Plank from Ed, Edd n Eddy. George fondles it for a bit before saying,
I saw the way you were looking at him. Remember what I did to Flight 307? I can do that to you. Don't forget, I own you.
It's been rumored that in fact this was a mistranslation. Many believe that the author had intended to refer to Flight 370, which was a plane that vanished on March 8th, 2014 and remains missing today. But by some coincidence there actually is a Flight 307, which hit a 70-foot flagpole during landing in the 1950s and crashed. However, the author's intent isn't known, so the nature of this choice is up to interpretation. Oh, and also George tosses Jen to the fishies. But of course, not before putting on its wig. I'm sensing a lot of trans references here. Not that I would know anything about that. So, George goes to Sidui. I think that's how it's pronounced at least. Who's his drunken helmsman. He tells him to set sail. One squirt of mouthwash later and they're crashed into the docks. Meanwhile, the other man is still looking for George, and hunts him down with the help of Moby Docks, who promises to take him right to George. But he's a bit preoccupied with buying food and getting beaten up by lumberjacks. When he does find him though, George orders his men to attack, and his drunken helmsman saves the day by spectacularly projectile vomiting with such force that it sends the other guy falling to his doom in the waters below. What a hero. And he sinks, and his only friend Moby Docks abandons him. What a dick. But much like powerful stories using the hero's journey format, this fall is only the setback that he needs to truly rise into greatness. Much like how Christian Bale's Batman climbed from the prison in The Dark Knight Rises, this man, who I think is still not given a name, will ascend back stronger than ever as he overcomes his personal obstacles to accomplish his goal. He washes up on the beach and is told by a random Cyclops that the gods spared him. He tells the man that in order to survive and get off the island, he must first find the center of the corn maze to get the blessing of the gods.
Oh, there's color? All of a sudden the color comes on?
15 hours later, he finds himself at the center of the maze where a giant ear of corn is sitting.
Welcome to the center. I am your spirit guide.
Truly, this rivals even the greatest tales of Greek mythology. The higher meaning here is so deep you could drown in it. The spirit guide then offers him a can of Sea Monster Zero to drink in order to receive its blessing, which he drinks and becomes a bee. Okay. He then flies off into the horizon to fulfill his ultimate destiny, now stronger and more determined than ever. Now obviously there is a lot of symbolism at play here. During the age of the first colonists, corn was seen as a precious resource that had gone untapped by international populations before then. This began to change around the time of Columbus when his crew reached the continent and opened up new possibilities for overseas trading. To many of the settlers, corn carried meanings of hope, salvation, and new possibilities, as it not only helped keep many of them alive when faced with starvation, but also became coveted by the rest of the world. In I Heart Whales, this theme is displayed most elegantly by having the spirit guide be made of corn himself, and the path to him being a corn maze. It represents his renewed hope and survival, and how for the settlers, corn itself was their savior, their spirit guide, if you will. But his transformation into a bee is another metaphor entirely, one that of course refers to the fact that while yes, settlers may have been able to survive thanks to corn, the overpopulation that would follow eventually threatened the bee population, which was ironically responsible for keeping all plant life alive and aided their reproduction. When the man is turned into a bee, it's referring to the fact that if life itself is to prevail, the overwhelming population of humans must be replaced with a population of bees. Not in the literal sense, of course, but the message is being conveyed this way to visually get across the meaning. If corn itself is to survive in the same way it allowed humans to in the past, mankind must return the favor by curbing the way it treats nature, by being replaced with bees. Now, as far as why the spirit guide gives him a can of Sea Monster Zero to initiate this transformation, the reason is fairly simple. The author is clearly making a statement on the toxicity of soda-based beverages. The spirit guide's encouragement of the man to drink it symbolizes the media's push for consumers to buy these unhealthy drinks. But him turning into a bee symbolizes that these drinks ultimately lead to human death, and that the death of man is ultimately what ensures this new reality where nature is able to rebound. Truly, I Heart Whales is the pinnacle of postmodernist social commentary that somehow manages to hold up a mirror to our flawed society without talking down to its readers. I can only imagine the intellect Henry Greenhill must possess to have brilliantly satirized our culture in a stunningly beautiful manner.
Mixing both striking visual beauty with classical, daring, unheard of intellect.
But back in the story, George is peering out the ocean holding his dead cat Roxanne while watching whales. Hey!
The last 150 orcas. Gotta catch them all. Yeah.
Roger approaches him and tells him he's wasting resources, to which George turns around, getting angry when Roger asks him why he hates whales so much.
George, what the fuck? Is that a dead cat?
George berates him, and Robert just gives up and walks the plank.
No, it's just... No, I can't do it anymore. I'm walking the plank.
Smartest character in this story, honestly, and in my opinion, the true unsung protagonist. Roger represents reality and hope when surrounded by the insane who reject him, and his departure symbolizes the death of reality from the perception of characters like George, who without the restraint that Roger provided, will descend into hopeless madness. Fittingly, the first thing George does after Roger leaves is vape a ton of meth. But right as things seem to have calmed, the other man, who still doesn't have a name as far as I know, flies aboard as a bee and morphs into his human form to begin the final battle. George sends out Roxanne, and, well, no luck.
Roxanne, I choose you. Attack! Why is it that everyone I love leaves me? Why has life cursed me with this fate? Why?
I imagine George didn't feel much better when his drunk helmsman saw what happened and flees as well. Right to his death. Then it's a 1v1. George against the guy who still has never been given a name. George gets his hand lopped off, but retaliates by unintentionally giving the guy fleas. George takes the chance to run, but is followed closely. The other man then opens the door to the room George trapped himself in, only to find that he was in the middle of hanging himself.
H is for hell. I'll see you in.
But the other guy isn't having it, and uses his axe to cut apart the rope, saving George's life.
Why didn't you let me die?
I'm not like you. I understand that people have value. You may be absolute garbages, but you're still worth something. I also did it for justice.
Oh boy.
He then takes George into the sunset to claim the money and pay off his lawyer, ironically ensuring that George will be executed anyway. But wait, just as you think it's all over, our Lord and Savior Roger returns to us after having survived the plunge into the ocean. He washes up on the same beach as the other guy where he encounters the Cyclops.
Welcome to my island. You seem all right. Are you ready to become the man you were always meant to be?
When will the madness end?
And that's it. The narrator then returns and... Is that Digibro?
That certainly was a whale of a tale.
Hey!
Join me next time for this crazy adventure. Good night and God bless.
True artistry.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is I Heart Whales.
It should be no mystery why I read this book every night, and I urge you all to do the same. It has action, adventure, deep character arcs, and brilliant satire rivaling even the works of Mark Twain. Now obviously, when I read this book for the first time, I was entranced with it, as anyone would be and as I'm sure you all are now. So of course, I had to meet the man behind it, but I'd picked up on several things. As you recall from the back cover, the author, Henry Greenhill, is referred to in third person, implying someone else published the book on his behalf. This is backed up by the fact that the story opens and closes with the narrator reading a pre-existing book called Pirates and Stuff, which is later changed to A Book About Pirates in one of the following frames. So I decided to ask about it directly from the man I'd gotten the request from. Someone who, up until this point, claimed to be the author himself.
So many questions I almost want to answer. but it'd be more interesting to see what you come up with. Just remember, the author is Henry Greenhill.
I was a bit confused, but decided to do further research into the name, since it was at least clear I was not talking with Henry Greenhill himself. One Google search later and I was met with a revelation. Henry Greenhill was in fact a 16th century English mariner who was once governor of the Gold Coast, commissioner of the British Navy, and member of Parliament. But what could this all mean? A layman may assume that I Heart Whales was a book conceptualized by Henry but later adapted into the version we see today by the anonymous patron of mine, but that doesn't quite fit. If you look deeper, you'll find a much more shocking truth. That being, Henry Greenhill is in fact alive today. How else would he be able to steal scraps from the Burger King dumpster? But you might be wondering, how did he pull it off? Well, it makes sense. We know that the back cover summary is written by someone other than him, and it's unlikely he's the in-universe narrator. So I'd venture a guess that Henry is actually the other man in the story. Think about it, it all fits. He's a 16th century sailor who remains unnamed throughout, and is apparently very recognizable in his community, and screams about justice all the time, which fits with him being a member of Parliament, since they all do that too. The entirety of this book is in fact a third-person retelling of events Henry witnessed firsthand during the early part of his life. But it's more significant than that. Some scholars who have gotten this far in the research regarding this topic theorize that Henry's encounter with the spirit guide and gaining of its blessing through the Sea Monster Zero drink gave him eternal life. Some even take it a step further and say that the center of the corn maze is actually the location of the Fountain of Youth, and is guarded by the spirit guide who wards off lost travelers by giving them immortality under the guise of blessing to get them off the island. It would explain why such measures have been taken, like putting up the maze in the first place, and having the island protected by a cyclops. Although we don't need to guess because the book lets out several major hints that this is the case. Mainly when Henry transforms into a bee, since as we all know, bees can live upwards of 5,000 years. Maybe it works by Shazam logic, where Henry's bee body doesn't age, but when he transforms back, all the time passes for him at once. Potentially, he stayed alive by retaining his bee form 24/7, which does explain why he'd be forced to have this book published by a third party, which is the patron who submitted the review request. But you might be wondering why. Why would an immortal man-bee who's actually a 16th century British Parliament member be so keen in publishing a book about his experiences? Well, as stated, we've already recognized the philosophical significance this book holds and the value of it being seen by the public, but does knowing the author's true identity change anything? The answer is yes, somewhat. We now know that this story wasn't fiction. So that being said, why did the author reference so many modern things within the book's continuity? In my opinion, he was a visionary who predicted all these events before they happened. Others say he just waited and published the book in the modern age after all these things already existed, but I think that's ridiculous to assume from a man who's shown himself to be nothing short of a prophet, but I digress. It is worth noting though that no matter how he included what he did in the story, it was clearly done for a reason. Flight 307, Sea Monster Zero, Pokemon references, it's all connected as one message being broadcasted out across space and time waiting for someone to decipher it. And I think that's exactly why Henry's associate decided to send it to me. The book may be an expertly crafted social commentary written by an immortal British man-bee Parliament member, but there's gotta be more to it than that, and he's entrusted me with the task of riddling it out. If you think about it, it makes perfect sense. The author is clearly familiar with my work enough to know that I can see the world much more clearly than everyone else. He knows I've discovered the truth about Google.com being a tyrannical corporation hell-bent on brainwashing the populace. How Mr. Beast, Justin Y, Mumkey Jones, and countless others were all its puppets, and when the time comes, they can and will destroy the rest of us.
We know it, I know it, and he knows I know it.
And maybe that's why he put the book together the way he did. Maybe that's why the story goes out of its way to reference people like Digibro, someone who I myself have talked about in the past. So what does it all mean? In my opinion, and it's the correct one so everyone else is wrong, this book's symbolism is only a front for its true meaning. You see, by putting up a front as a kid's book, it becomes an internet oddity, and by putting up a sub-front as a brilliant social commentary, it becomes coveted by scholars and pretentious internet critics. But beneath all of that is a tertiary layer that even the most enlightened don't see.
People have fought me on this. They don't see it, or they are closed-minded.
In putting up the other layers, Henry allowed his book to spread so far that eventually it'd find the right person to interpret it. And to quote Joseph276,
"That person is me, by the way."
I will interpret this twisted allegory so thoroughly that it will even put to shame the intellectual greats like Senpai Freud. The meaning was hidden so deeply because Henry knew if it wasn't, Google.com would have caught wind long ago and executed him cruelly. Much like how Chinese protesters are forced to speak in metaphors due to the law against criticizing the government directly. So, the subtext is this. The end is coming, but Google won't win. Just look at Roger Clay, the last surviving mate of George who we already established represents hope. He casts himself overboard and gives up, but is teased at still being alive elsewhere. Although, as watchers of this channel, that name is far too significant to be overlooked. Roger is clearly referring to the spree killer Elliot Rodger, and the fact that Henry Greenhill as a historical figure supposedly died on May 24th only solidifies this further, since Elliot died on the 23rd of that same month. Much like how Flight 370 and Flight 307 were only one day apart in the same month as well. Henry clearly knew, given all my videos, that giving that name to a character would highlight him and make me pay more attention to his allegorical importance, which of course I did, as you've seen. The story is trying to say that with hope gone, many will give up and the end will come. But where there is an end, there is a new beginning. And rather than being gone, hope for the future may in fact lie elsewhere. As stated, the corn maze is literally the fountain of youth, which symbolically means that wherever hope for the future has moved to, it's in a place where those who find it can be safe for all eternity from Google's wrath. This point is further driven home when you remember that corn itself signifies hope as well. But maybe, and this is just coming to me now, maybe this isn't referring to Google at all. Maybe it's a larger theme that applies to life in general. That being that hope may seem to go away, but that it's never gone entirely. It can always be found elsewhere if one is willing to search. Like Flight 370, which vanished completely but must be somewhere else. And this is why Henry swapped the 7 and the 0 when referring to the airline. He was telling us that finding hope isn't comparable to finding Flight 370. No one can find the plane. Okay, so I was wrong. But everyone can find hope. Like how Henry found worth in George despite George not being able to see it in himself. Or how in Pokemon, Ash fails miserably in every region for 20 years but finds hope elsewhere and keeps moving until finally winning the Alolan League. This is why Henry references Pokemon in the story. But nothing sums this all up better than the title itself, I Heart Whales. In the book, there are only 150 left in existence. George hates them and has even less regard for them as he does human life. But this is where Henry and George differ. Henry has hope that the whales will continue to survive and finds value in them the same way he found it in George. Don't be a George, be a Henry.
Don't have the deed, have a heart.
When hope seems to be gone, find it in places you didn't think to look before. Whether you're one of the 150 remaining whales, a once edgy YouTuber squashed by an evil corporation that hates you, or an average person who's lost and lives without hope, trust that you'll find it again, even in ways you didn't intend.
Yo, what's up guys? My name is Nervy. And welcome back to another video.